The road leading into Beavertail State Park does not disappoint, with spectacular ocean views just beyond the entrance, and the Beavertail Lighthouse, billed as the third oldest in the United States, at the end of the peninsula. But you'd have to look hard to find a World War II era lookout station, hidden behind a bank of trees and vegetation, that is registered as a non-profit museum with the state of Rhode Island. The authorized vehicles only sign is the first indication that this museum, in a state-owned building, is not open to the public. Just beyond, two more warning signs are attached to a 6-foot-high chain-link fence, making it clear that visitors are not welcome. Behind that fence is the Fort Burnside Communication and Coastal Defense Museum, built in 1942 by the U.S. Navy as a lookout station to keep an eye on military shipping traffic along the Rhode Island coast during World War II. A Hummel report investigation found the Department of Environmental Management, which manages the park and the building, has allowed a private citizen living there as a caretaker to create a non-profit museum that allows no access to the general public, even though it bills itself in annual papers filed with the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office as a museum whose mission is, quote, the preservation, presentation, and interpretation of the history and associated artifacts related to Fort Burnside. So we decided to find out for ourselves if Fort Burnside was a working museum, visiting during a weekday in August at the height of the tourist season. An unidentified woman came to the door when we arrived.
Is this the Fort Burnside Museum?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Pardon?
Where is it?
In here.
Okay.
But it's not open right now.
When is it open?
I'll have to find out. I'm just visiting.
The museum was founded in 2005 by its longtime caretaker, Mark Brown Beezer, who has lived at Fort Burnside since 1981. There's no mention of it on DEM's website and no signage anywhere in the park. So we went to Larry Moragian, DEM's Associate Director for Natural Resources Management. This is Moragian from an interview earlier this year. He declined to speak with us on camera for this story. He did tell us off camera, quote, our priority was to keep presence in the building to deter vandalism, to have someone who could report situations that might be developing in the park that we should be aware of and ultimately do some maintenance on it, and maybe someday to turn it into a museum with some public access. DEM has signed a series of leases with Beezer going back to 1989, when he was paying $275 a month. It increased to $446 a month in the 1990s and is now at $520 per month. Moragian noted the rent is determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which says the fair market value for a structure like Fort Burnside is $801 a month. But Beezer receives a 15% discount for, quote, surveillance, another 10% for response, and an additional 10% off for the nuisance of having to live there. That discounts the total to $520. Beezer is not required to file any reports with DEM, but Moragian says he is in touch with his staff if an incident on Beavertail happens. Beezer gave us a tour of Fort Burnside last week. More on that in a moment. In a subsequent interview, Moragian told us that he has spoken with Beezer since we first started asking questions, and they are both open to providing some public access to the museum in the future. Quote, you raised several questions that, to be honest with you, over time, I didn't necessarily consider until you raised them, Moragian told us.
This was the main observation bay. As you can see, it's slightly modified from its World War II configuration.
Fort Burnside has an astounding 27 rooms on 3 levels. There are multiple rooms in a bunker below ground, surrounded by 3-foot thick concrete walls and steel.
In the event of an attack, there was steel doors that could be closed to seal off the, as I said before, the non-tactical areas.
The fort was meant to withstand bomb blast and gas attacks that never came during the war. Beezer, a history buff and collector, has rooms filled with vintage military radio systems, some in active working condition. He was living in Jamestown in the late 1970s, knew about the fort, and made a proposal to the U.S. Navy to move in as a caretaker after the property had been vandalized. When the property was turned over to the state, he continued as a caretaker.
This was the original radio and coding room.
Beezer has equipment that still works and every summer hosts a gathering of ham radio enthusiasts at Fort Burnside the last weekend in June to practice emergency communication procedures with municipal entities. This YouTube video captured some of it back in 2010. Beezer said more recently he was in touch with people on Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, relaying messages from the island. Beezer has converted one room on the first floor into a kitchen with a wood pellet stove and lives in only a small portion of the house during the winter, as there is no central heating. This is his summertime bedroom. For most of the year, he has one of the best views in the state from a rooftop balcony with a nearly 360-degree view of the water. And just beyond his backyard, Beavertail State Park. Outside, he noted that the bunker was disguised to be a farmhouse during the war, complete with fake windows that are really concrete. Beezer told us he wants to be more open, but works as an engineer for an emission control company and is on the road a lot, adding that the building does not provide any handicapped accessibility. But he and Moragian, as a result of our inquiry, are going to explore opening Fort Burnside on an appointment basis for tours, like the one he gave us. DEM also plans to create a separate page on its website featuring the history of the fort and interpretive signs nearby, as it has at other DEM parks, like Fort Wetherill just down the road in Jamestown. There's no timetable yet for the public access. In Jamestown, Jim Hummel for the Hummel Report.